Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into 1 Corinthians chapter 11.
Yeah, this one's packed. It gets right into some very, specific things going on in the Corinthian church.
Really specific instructions about how they should act when they gathered, right? For worship, meals, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's a real window into their struggles, trying to figure out community life, order, respect, all that stuff, down to very practical things like head coverings and meals.
Okay, let's start with that first section, verses 3 through 16. This deals with order, appearance, and it kicks off with a statement about structure.
It does. Verse 3 lays out this framework. Christ is the head of man, man is the head of woman, and God is the head of Christ.
So that structure kind of sets the stage for what
Well,
follows.
precisely. The instructions about, head coverings are presented within that understanding of order.
Right. And those instructions are pretty direct, aren't they? What about for men?
Verse 4 says, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head.
So, for a man, covering the head during these acts was seen as dishonorable.
That's the idea presented.
And then for women, it's the opposite.
Verse 5, every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. And then it makes this comparison.
Oh, yeah. It is just as though her head were shaved.
Exactly. Which, in that cultural context, having your head shaved was often a sign of deep shame or disgrace. So it's a really strong parallel.
Okay, but Paul doesn't just leave it there, does he? He gives reasons for these rules. Stuff about image and glory.
Yes, several lines of reasoning. Verse 7, for instance. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man.
So it connects the man's appearance to reflecting God's glory and the woman's role. Well, in relation to the man's glory.
That's the connection being drawn there, and then it goes back to Genesis, the creation story.
Right, verses 8 and 9.
Yeah, for man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man.
Using the creation order to explain the different expectations for how they should appear in worship.
It's presented as part of the rationale, yes.
Okay, and then we get verse 10. This one always feels a bit mysterious. For this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. What's that about? The angels.
Yes. Verse 10, it's famously difficult to interpret. That phrase, sign of authority, could mean a few things in the Greek. Maybe it's her own authority, or a sign she's under authority.
And the angels part?
Well, commentators suggest different things. Maybe angels are watching worship and care about order. Or maybe it connects to some Jewish traditions about angels. It's not entirely clear.
But the point is it adds another layer of significance, maybe a spiritual one, beyond just social custom.
Exactly. It suggests this practice has some kind of cosmic dimension. And then the reasoning shifts again.
To nature, verses 14 and 15.
Right. Appealing to the very nature of things. Suggesting long hair is disgraceful for men, but a glory, a natural covering for women. Bringing in cultural norms about appearance.
But just when you think it's all about hierarchy and these specific rules, verses 11 and 12 come in.
Yes. This is so important. It says, in the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman.
For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman, but everything comes from God. That feels like a really crucial balance.
It absolutely is. It emphasizes this mutual dependence, especially in the Lord, within the community of faith.
It acknowledges the creation origin, but also the present reality that men are born from women, and ultimately everyone depends on God. So it stops the hierarchy from becoming like absolute.
Precisely. It creates this tension,
Yeah.
between the order discussed earlier and this reality of interdependence and their shared identity in Christ. Their relationships aren't just about creation order, but also about their new life in God.
And how does this whole section wrap up? Verse 16.
It ends pretty firmly. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God.
Basically saying, this is how it's done, end of discussion.
It certainly sounds like an appeal to established practice to shut down further argument on that point.
Okay, so that's the first chunk: appearance, order, head coverings. But the issues in Corinth ran deeper, didn't they? He shifts gears pretty hard in verse 17.
Oh, definitely. He starts the next section with some really strong words. In the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good.
Wow, do more harm than good. That's quite the assessment of their gatherings.
It is. He's heard about divisions among them. Verse 18 mentions that.
And verse 19 has that interesting line about differences showing who has God's approval.
Right. Almost suggesting these conflicts can, in a way, clarify who's genuinely living out their faith.
But the main focus seems to be their communal meals, specifically the Lord's Supper. Verse 20 says flat out, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat.
Yeah, a stark statement. He's saying whatever they think they're doing, it doesn't actually count as the Lord's Supper because of how they're doing it.
And how are they doing it? What was going wrong?
Verse 21 lays it out. Basically, people weren't waiting for each other. Everyone just jumped into their own food.
So, one remains hungry, another gets drunk.
Exactly. It sounds like the wealthier members who could bring food and maybe arrived earlier were eating and drinking, maybe even overindulging, while the poorer members, maybe slaves who arrived later with nothing, were left hungry. It was completely fractured.
No sense of community or sharing at all, just individual meals happening in the same room.
Pretty much. And he slams this behavior in verse 22. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing?
He connects their actions directly to despising the church itself, the community, and shaming the poor.
Yes, it shows how seriously he viewed this failure in fellowship during what should have been a sacred time.
So to correct this, he reminds them of the origin and meaning of the Lord's Supper itself.
Right. He says in verse 23 he received it from the Lord. Then he recounts the Last Supper.
Jesus taking bread, giving thanks, breaking it. This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.
And then the cup after supper. This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it, in remembrance of me.
Reestablishing the foundation. It's about remembrance, his sacrifice, the new covenant.
And verse 26 gives the purpose. Whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. It's a proclamation looking back and looking forward.
Okay, but then comes the really heavy part. The warnings about how they participate. Verse 27.
Yeah, that's a serious one. Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord.
Eating unworthily. What does that actually mean here? Is it just about having the right thoughts, or?
Well, look at the context in verses 28 and 29. Verse 28 says, examine yourself first. And 29 warns about eating and drinking without recognizing the body of the Lord, which brings judgment.
Recognizing the body. Does that mean understanding the bread symbolizes Christ's physical body? Or is it tied to how they were treating the other body, the church, the community?
I think most scholars, given the context of the divisions and the selfish eating he just condemned, would say it's likely both. Failing to discern the spiritual significance of the elements and failing to recognize and honor the gathered community, the body of Christ, especially the vulnerable members they were ignoring.
So participating while actively dividing the community and ignoring the poor was participating unworthily.
That seems to be precisely the point. Their behavior showed they weren't truly recognizing what the body meant in either sense.
And the consequences he mentions. They are shocking. Verse 30, that is why many among you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. Fallen asleep meaning died.
That's the strong implication, yes. The text directly links physical illness and even death within the community to this unworthy participation in the Lord's Supper. It's presented as a form of divine judgment or discipline.
Wow. That's intense. He's saying their lack of consideration for each other during this meal had actual physical life or death consequences.
It's presented that way, yes.
Yeah.
And verses 31-32 suggest that if they had judged themselves, meaning, examined, and corrected their own behavior, they wouldn't have faced this judgment.
So the spiritual significance of their conduct in this ritual was incredibly high. Okay, after all that heavy warning, what's the practical fix he gives them?
You know, after the warnings about judgment and death, the solution is almost startlingly simple. Verse 33. So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for each other.
Just wait.
Just wait. Basic consideration. Share the meal together as a community.
And he adds that bit about eating at home first if you're starving.
Right, verse 34. If anyone is hungry, he should eat at home, so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. The point wasn't primarily to satisfy physical hunger, but to share in this act of remembrance and fellowship respectfully.
Avoid turning the communal sacred meal into just another dinner where people are judged for being needy or acting selfishly.
Exactly. And he wraps up by saying he'll give more instructions later.
Showing this was just one piece of an ongoing conversation.
Mhm.
So reflecting on this chapter today, it's ancient. The specific cultural stuff about head coverings might feel distant. But these core issues, community, order, respect, how we conduct shared practices, they still resonate, don't they?
Absolutely. It really pushes you to think about how any group establishes norms, maintains respect, especially during activities that are meant to express shared values.
And how easily those activities can become sources of division or exclusion if we're not careful.
Yeah, and the text makes this incredibly strong link between how the practical conduct and the spiritual meaning, and even apparently physical well-being.
It challenges us, to think about our own shared spaces and rituals. How seriously do we take the connection between our beliefs and our actual behavior towards each other within those contexts?
What really strikes me is that insistence that simple actions like waiting for someone at a meal aren't trivial in a faith community. They can reflect something profound about whether we truly respect the people we share that faith with.
So maybe the question for us listening today is something like this. If our shared activities, our rituals, whatever form they take, are supposed to mean something deep, what does the way we actually do them say about what we truly value?